Let me feel sorry first, because there was some emergency due to which a meeting was to be held and then I got delayed. In fact, I had a class at 12 o'clock, that also I had to somehow. Now some of the students are here itself. I think most of the issues have been covered by Professor Thorat. I will speak I think for very few minutes, and I would speak about that what has been happening over a period of time regarding the political representation in the post independence period in particular. You see that when we started with our journey for democracy, then from 1952 to let us say 1967, the kind of representation that we were getting was basically coming from the so called higher castes, and it was after 1967 that in different states the non-Congress governments were formed, and those non-Congress governments were basically coming from, as Professor Thorat told, that these were basically from the dominant sections of the society, that was the Jats in northern parts of Haryana or Punjab or let us say western Uttar Pradesh or Rajasthan, and then in the southern parts Patels, western Marathas, etc., etc. So, that way I think the kind of representation it has been going on with a lot of changes, and till 1977 or so, when the first non-Congress government was constituted in at the center, that time actually if you see, then there was a lot of change that has taken place in the overall social configuration of the parliamentary system. And from there onwards, what we see is that there has been the kind of representation which went to the minorities, and then finally the women representation has also been increasing, but not, it still remains like it remains only around 14% or so, which started I think with the 6% or so. So, in this way I think the overall representation system, different communities have over a period of time asserted themselves for their own representation. Like if the marginalized sections, the Dalits were having their representation, then the women also started asking for representation, and that was given at the, as you know, at the panchayat level and also in the urban bodies. But when it comes to the representation in the let us say parliament and the state legislative assemblies, that has been kept hold for a very long time. It is actually now more than 25 years that the women reservation bill has not been passed in the parliament. So, this is one of the major I would say the flaws of the overall political representation in the country. And when it comes to the those that have been given special representation, then there is a question, certainly the question of the effective representation or the symbolic representation, whether this is just a nominal representation or this is an effective representation. And many studies, including my own studies, would tell that the representation of the scheduled castes and scheduled tribes remains very ineffective, though one can also argue that this representation, if would not have been available, though it is ineffective, nominal, but suppose it would not have been available, then the things would have been much worse. And that is what the idea behind, I think, the kind of representation which for which Dr. Ambedkar agreed. He also knew it very well, and as Professor Thorat has already told you that 1932 he agreed for joint electorates, And then again he raised the issue, because he came to know very well that the joint electorates will not be bringing out the effective representation of the scheduled caste and scheduled tribes. And that's where I think this idea of if you look at his writings in 1955, then he goes to the multi-member constituencies, and the multi-member constituency was something very a different kind of innovative idea that Dr. Ambedkar, given the diverse structure, social structure of the Indian society, therein he thought that if the separate electorate has not been agreed upon, and now we have the ineffective, almost ineffective political representatives of these communities, then let us go for the multi-member constituencies, wherein let us say there are 5 constituencies put together, and therein it will be like one scheduled caste, one OBC, one women and one religious minority. That way actually that kind of multi-member constituency actually was visualized in that sense in 1955, when he is talking about the reorganization of states. Therein he gives this idea. So, what I think is that the representation of the marginalized sections of the society, the scheduled caste and scheduled tribe in particular, therein if you look at that, when I studied that how do they represent inside the Parliament House, then it was astonishing to know that land, which is a very important question for the Dalits, because majority of the Dalits have been living in the rural areas, only one question was asked out of around 400, and that question was not asked by the Dalit representative, but it was asked by a non-Dalit representative. So, you can understand that what kind of a representation it is, and then which are the questions those have been asked by the representatives, scheduled caste representatives. They were asking basic questions around the job reservations. Why the job reservation? Because there is some kind of link between the little educated class and the representatives. So, if some job is not being filled up, or there is some kind of discrimination and all that. So, therein these wherein we say that relatively educated class, they actually go to the parliamentarians and then they pressurize them that please ask these kind of questions. So, if you look at this way, then what happens is, then we realize that the actual issues of the Dalits, which are with regard to let us say land or basic rights, therein even the atrocities question was addressed in a significant manner, but therein also what was happening is that the government was coming out with different legislations over a period of time to make it effective. But when it comes to the ground level realities, then it was not changing by and large. You know that initially we just had the Article 17 removal of the untouchability. Then we had to come out with 1955 Act, Untouchability Offences Act. That also did not work. Then we came out with another act, that was the Prevention of Protection of Civil Rights Act. That also did not work. We come out with Prevention of Atrocities Act. That also does not work. Then we modify in 2013 or so with some of the modification. So, see that how this evolution of the law is taking place, but at the same time what is happening is that law is taking its course, but at the same time new ways of discrimination emerge, and that is where I think the role of the parliamentarians, of scheduled caste parliamentarians, has been, in sometimes it has been effective, sometimes it has not been effective. Like if you look at the way they were debating inside the house, then the debates inside the house were actually primarily on the atrocities. when it comes to the jobs, let us say insisting on the private sector reservation, therein there is no insistence, there is no regularity, there is no continuity, and that is where I think the idea of effective representation has been a very central to this kind of representation, which remains by and large a nominal representation, and the members remain members of the party, but not actually representatives of the people. So, I think that is the most difficult challenge of our times, that despite reservation, there is one interesting part, that for the parliamentary reservation or state assembly reservation, there are no demands. It is naturally it is done after 10 years. But where there are demands like the job reservation, atrocities, there the government does not do much. So, this is one of the contradictions, I think, which the political representatives need to understand and also address these questions. I think with this I will stop here, and will listen more to Professor Thorat also for during the question answer session. Thank you. Yeah.